Today I'm going to tell you the tragic story of Stefanie Rengel, who was murdered back in 2008 on New Year's Eve. This story will talk about toxic teenage love and how stupid we could essentially be when we're early teens. If you do end up liking this video, please subscribe, do follow me on Instagram, links are in the description, and please take note there might be some profanity, some cursing, maybe some jokes. Just remember, I'm telling this story in the best way I think it should be conveyed. Now, initially, all of this started out as a joke. Melissa Todorovic, she's dating David Bradshaw, and she told David that she hated Stefanie Rengel. She wanted Stefanie Rengel's life to be taken, but then eventually, these jokes, they became a plan, and she gave David an ultimatum. She said to him, "No sex until Stefanie is dead." Now, the day before she died, Stefanie sang Avril Lavigne's "Slipped Away" on a karaoke machine her parents rented for her on New Year's Eve. The 14-year-old attended Rosedale School for Arts and she was a born performer. She had clear, smooth skin, a highbrow and expressive brown eyes, and she loved to play with her parents. One day, she would turn up at school in a tutu and sneakers. The next day, in a pair of heart patterned boxers, over tights, all clothes she picked up second-hand shops in Kensington Market. She dyed her hair red, blue, brown, black. She wore eyeliner and even brightly colored beaded bracelets. Just before midnight, Stefanie counted down the new year with her family before embracing. Her mother, Patricia Hung, she remembers at the time, she said, "We made it a point of being together because soon enough our kids would be older and then they'd hang out with their friends on New Year's Eve. So during their young teenage years, I wanted to see them." The next day was cold and snowy. Stefanie went to a friend's house and then returned home. She was standing in the kitchen, munching Doritos, watching her brother Ian eat a grilled cheese sandwich, when her cell phone rang at 6:08 p.m. Stefanie thought that the voice on the line of the phone was her ex-boyfriend Steve Lopez. Now, Stefanie had broken up with him 2 months earlier, and when she picked up the phone, someone said, "Is that you?" The caller ID was actually blocked. The male voice on the phone sounded concerned. He sounded upset. He said, meet me," to which Stefanie put on her coat, put on her shoes, dashed outside. But the caller wasn't Lopez. It was David Bradshaw. David Bradshaw was a 5'11", 240-pound football player, 4 days shy of his 18th birthday. He was hiding in the bushes on the median that divides the street. Stefanie never stood a chance. David was carrying an 8-inch kitchen knife and stabbed her repeatedly, tearing through the black sweater that Stefanie's mother gave her for Christmas. One stab punctured her left breast, entered her chest cavity and hit the inside of her back. Another perforated her right lung and sliced open her liver. A third penetrated her ribs and stomach, causing her stomach contents to drain into her peritoneal cavity. A fourth stabbed her left upper arm. David stabbed her 6 times in total and then he ran away. Stefanie spilled blood on the street as she staggered her way back to her home before collapsing on the snowbank. She was still alive when Gavin Shoebottom, a 34-year-old accountant, was driving by and saw her body. He jumped out of his car. He holds Stefanie. He calls 911. He tells Stefanie, hang in there, hold your stomach." The 911 dispatcher instructed Shoebottom to apply pressure on the wound. Shoebottom had a bedsheet in his car and he used this to try and tame the wound where the blood was coming from, and he then asked Stefanie, "Who was it? Who did this to you?" Her organs were beginning to fail, but she slowly muttered the words, "Bugs, you and that." Shoebottom became frantic while he waited for the ambulance. He held Stefanie tight, but then she became unconscious. "Come on, sweetie, you're okay," he said. The paramedics finally arrived and whisked Stefanie to Toronto East General, where she was pronounced dead, the city's first homicide victim of 2008. Stefanie's was a close-knit family. She lived in a 2-story house in Parkview Hills, a tranquil neighborhood in East York, with her mother Patricia, her stepfather James Hung, and her 3 brothers, 12-year-old Ian, 4-year-old Eric, and 2-year-old Patrick. Patricia had grown up in Parkview Hills and she began dating Stefanie's father James back in 2000. Her first husband, Adolfo Rengel, is a Venezuelan immigrant and co-officer for the Toronto Police Service. Patricia and James were both cops. Patricia specialized in gang exiting and cyberbullying, and James is a sergeant with the Emergency Task Force. Now, Patricia's ex-husband Adolfo was the father of Stefanie, but they divorced when Stefanie was 6 years old. And since then, Stefanie and her brother Ian lived with their mother, but she was strict but fair. See, Stefanie, she could see boyfriends, but only at the house. And a nose ring was okay, but she was not allowed to wear it to church. At church, Stefanie helped teach Sunday school, and she was permitted to be on Facebook as long as her mother knew the password. Patricia, in fact, did do random spot checks on her Facebook and even installed a keystroke monitoring program on their PC at the house. I mean, I understand a mother's going to look after her daughter and see, aspects of her private life, but that's taking it too far, surely, right? And when Stefanie visited her father and her stepmother Maureen at their home in Whitby, the rules were far more strict. Even her father Adolfo monitored her PC use and didn't allow her to use a webcam. The kids had to be home before dark, and Adolfo regularly reminded Stefanie to watch out to who she trusts. And it could be a case here where Patricia is the one telling Adolfo, yo, I'm strict with her, so you gotta be strict with her too. You could say that maybe they went overboard with the monitoring of her. I don't think this played a role in what happened to Stefanie at all, but her home life is an interesting observation nonetheless. For all her brashness, Stefanie had a soft, trusting core. She began attending a youth group at a Baptist church and loved Christian rock bands and Latin music. She wrote poems and took hundreds of photographs with her digital camera. She picked up elastic bands from the street to protect birds from choking on them. Now, the first news stories about Stefanie's death, they said how tragic it was that a cop's daughter could be killed on their doorstep. But as the story grew more lurid, the coverage intensified. It turned out that Stefanie was the victim of two killers, David Bagshaw and Melissa Todorovic. Melissa was the 15-year-old girl who convinced David to commit murder. They planned it in thousands of text messages and emails. What started as a joke fantasy conceived amid their toxic exchanges became real. This murder gripped the imagination, but because it was so repulsively concocted by a pair of disturbed, self-obsessed teens who seemed utterly oblivious to the gravity of their intentions. See, Stefanie, she dated David for a couple of weeks, 2 years before she died. And I don't know what the intimacy of the relationship was like, but generally speaking, a 15-year-old with a 12-year-old, they would meet in the park near her house and have lunch together at a pizza joint. She was flattered by the attention of a broad-shouldered high school football player. But David then left a message on her voice phone by saying he wanted to intensify the relationship by having oral sex. It seemed like Stefanie's mom heard this message and told her, stay the fuck away. Stefanie was angry that her mother didn't trust her, that she would not be seduced by an older teen's sexual inhibitions, but in the end she agreed and she moved on from David. Bagshaw and Melissa Todorovic went to East York College and started seeing each other in March 2007. Melissa lived in Scarborough with her parents, Zoran and Rachel Todoric, and her younger brother, Nicholas. Now, her father, he was a mechanic. He was a Serbian immigrant, and he often took her fishing and to hockey games. Melissa was also close to her mother, who worked in a cookie factory. The family took vacations in the Caribbean and in Mexico and regular trips to their cottage. A grade 8 student, Melissa worked hard for her marks. Her grade 8 report cards describe her as considerate, helpful and independent, in class with excellent study habits. If Stefanie had the confidence to pull off a whimsical look, Melissa was a conformist. She wore glasses and braces and was constantly anxious about the way she looked. Melissa wore glasses and was constantly anxious about the way she looked. She also wore braces. She wasn't happy with her weight, with her breasts, with her hands, and with her fingers. She wanted multiple plastic surgeries. Every morning, she would spend half an hour in the bathroom straightening her wavy hair. On rainy days, she'd take a straightening iron to school. She suffered from occasional bouts of bulimia and was convinced she needed a boyfriend to validate herself. Now, what's interesting is that David was Melissa's fourth boyfriend. With each relationship ending, she became more dysfunctional. In fact, after one relationship, she ended up cutting herself. She monitored the email of the boyfriend she had before David, and when they parted, she had actually threatened the new girlfriend of her ex-boyfriend. Melissa called her a slut and a skank and denigrated her former boyfriend's sexual behavior, smell, clothing, and physical appearance, including his pubic hair. Who the fuck goes after one's pubic hair? I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I shave all mine off for the purposes of hygiene, but going after one's pubic hair? Like, I can imagine her saying, he was lousy in bed. Okay, fair enough. He smells so bad. Okay, fair enough. He had ginger pubes. Huh? And with her ex and his new girlfriend, she threatened to send David to give them a beating, and David himself was not an ideal boyfriend, and so far, you can paint a picture on Melissa that she's insecure and she's controlling. She can't handle her emotions, and it seems that given her young age, she just does not know how to handle love. Puppy love, emotions, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to use love as an umbrella term. She just doesn't know how to handle it. It's too much for her at this juncture of her life. David, however, was unfaithful to Melissa and on occasion hit her. His parents, Ronald and Cindy Bagshaw, were separated. He was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 3, and he had behavioral problems and aggressive outbursts in school. By junior high, he was frequently absent from class, and he was eventually suspended numerous times for swearing at the teachers. Incredibly, age 14, he was charged with assaulting his mother, but then the charges were dropped after he agreed to take anger management classes. Who in the fuck blue of Toronto, where this all took place, assaults their mother? After this incident, he moved back and forth from his parents' homes, and then by the time he hit 15, he lived in a group home for 3 months. Now what's interesting is David's father didn't like Melissa. She was too controlling, and he did not allow Melissa to enter his home. And when you're older and you're a parent, you're wiser, sometimes you can look at young people and you can see straight through them. And David's father knew exactly what kind of girl she was. But David himself, being young, dumb, and full of cum, obviously did not see the flaws Melissa had. And if he did, then the love he felt blinded him from seeing Melissa for who she really was. In fact, Melissa was so crazy that she would leave notes for David's mother saying, "You're not fit to be a mother." So you got David who's beating up Melissa, and you got Melissa who's controlling over David, and it's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? In fact, it got to the point where Melissa installed spyware software onto David's computer so she could monitor what he was doing. And crazily, in this whole story, Melissa had actually never met Stefanie at this point, but she knew Stefanie and David had dated. Now, the funny thing in all of this for me is, if I had a girlfriend and she installed spyware on my PC, I genuinely wouldn't care because I have nothing to hide and I'm quite the open book. However, it's not really about that. It's about the principle of the matter. Are you so insecure that you need to monitor every single aspect of this person's life? You're not the fucking CIA, and I'm not Edward Snowden. But I go back to what I said in the beginning. These guys were 14, 15-year-olds. What do you expect? Emotions, hormones. Their bodies are still developing. They are, I guess you could say, on the last stages, or maybe they've gone beyond puberty, right? But they're at that stage now where they are interacting deeply with the opposite sex, and they've got no idea what the fuck to do. So I do wonder in this, David's parents and Melissa's parents, how much of a role did they play? How much did they actually monitor the couple? David's father certainly seemed in tune with the relationship. He certainly seemed to pay attention. But then again, I don't think you can blame the parents. Ultimately, this was the decision of two young adults, I guess. After David remarked he thought Stefanie was pretty, Melissa began to obsessively examine her pictures on Facebook. Stefanie told Melissa's cousin that David was bad news and that he'd been flirting with her and other girls behind Melissa's back. Now let's break that down a little bit. I don't mean to speak ill of Stefanie, but it could be, I'm just going to throw this out there, it could be that through some random moment of jealousy, maybe, Stefanie, she saw Melissa with David, maybe got a little bit jealous. I'm not saying this is the case, I'm just putting it out there. And maybe she told the cousin something, knowing the cousin would then give it back to Melissa, and she did this just to piss Melissa off. Or she could have said it as she was trying to tell Melissa, look, I've been with this guy and he's a fucking idiot, walk away. But when this information got back to Melissa, she was furious. Melissa's parents urged her to call off the relationship, but she didn't listen. Who is going to look at somebody with braces and glasses when there's so many pretty girls in high school? She asked her mother. Melissa then came up with a solution to David's infidelity. Kill Stefanie. Stefanie had eventually become a target. She become embroiled in this relationship even though she had nothing to do with it. The idea, once formed, became the central dynamic that drove their relationship. On May the 22nd, 2007, she accused him of talking with Stefanie. I'm going to fucking stab her if I want to, then I'll just kill her, she told David in an online chat session. The next day, he offered to bring her a knife. She said she already had one. And over the summer, the flippant conversation about how to take the life of Stefanie continued. Melissa actually told David that she had a random dream about Stefanie, how she become jealous of Stefanie, so in the dream, she cut off her boobs. As the deliberations became more and more elaborate, an actual plan began to take shape. Melissa told David that he was the one who must kill Stefanie. Melissa said to David, I don't want to kill her, lol. Like, I don't care if someone does it, I just don't want to be the one to do it. In the fall of 2007, Stefanie began grade 9 at Rosedale Heights, taking the bus every morning to Woodbine Station and the subway to Castle Frank. At lunch, she would walk to a nearby supermarket and buy a ham sandwich or snack from the samples of olives and Oreo cookies. Fun fact, I cannot stand olives, they're so nasty. Now on the night of October the 20th, this is still 2007, after arguing with Melissa, David finally went to Stefanie's home. He phoned her from the driveway, trying to lure her outside. But when she came outside, he couldn't go through with it. He told her, Melissa wants me to stab you. He told her straight to her face. Then he threw down his cell phone and he said to Stefanie, if Melissa calls, tell her that I tried to kill you so then she can stop pestering me. The incident frightened Stefanie and then she ran to her mother. Patricia, the mother, called Melissa and warned her to stay away from her daughter. But Melissa wasn't easily intimidated. She said to Patricia, well, tell Stefanie to stop talking shit about me. She's spreading rumors. Patricia, surprised at Melissa's reaction, she said that Stefanie only wanted to make sure she knew her boyfriend was being unfaithful. They continued to have a back and forth and then Patricia threatened to get a restraining order against her and then ended the call. The Hung family returned David's cell phone to his mother and asked her to keep her son away from Stefanie. David's mother agreed this was a good idea. Patricia, though initially concerned, wrote the incident off as teenage melodrama and decided not to involve police. And to be fair, it is teenage melodrama. Maybe it's a bit too far, where David went up to Stefanie and I guess you could say did everything that Melissa asked except the killing, but at this point, not involving the police from the parents' point of view makes sense because they don't know the wider context of this conversation. But the murder plot didn't end there. The following day, Melissa and David were back at it on MSN Messenger. What about Steph? He wrote. Bang bang, responded Melissa. I need a bang first. I want to bang you, he replied. Dirty bastard. Now on December the 15th, Melissa kept nagging David again. She said, you need to keep your promise. I want you to fulfill your promise. I want you to go and get a gun. I need a mask and gloves, he replied, so Stefanie's parents wouldn't recognize him. To which Melissa said, well, go get fucking leotards then. 2 days later, she taunted David. She threatened that she was going to dump him and go be with someone else until he killed her. And I'm trying to understand David's mindset in all of this. Again, I don't know if David and Melissa were in love, but it was definitely something like it. I don't mean love literally, I just can't think of another word right now, but he's so attached and he's too big of a pussy to tell Melissa, get the fuck away from me, you crazy bitch. But he was too weak to walk away because I think he was afraid of being alone. And I could be wrong when I say that, but I can't think of any other reason why he would stay attached to this crazy teenager. Then again, he was quite violent towards her, so I guess violence may not beget violence, sometimes violence attracts violence. On New Year's Eve, at about 6:30 p.m, while Stefanie and her extended family were gathered inside drinking sparkling cider and singing karaoke songs, David approached the house. He lurked In the yard next door, he was talking on his cell phone and he was spotted by the neighbor. He and Melissa called and texted each other 65 times that night. He actually dialed Stefanie's cell phone several times, but it's unclear if them two even spoke prior to the incident. On January the 1st, Melissa shut David out. He texted her 3 times. "Where are you? You're cheating. Why won't you answer me?" And this kind of response by David messaging her is him needing reassurance. She told him, "Well, if you don't do it, I'm going to be with the next man." And he's thinking, "Oh shit, oh fuck, she's going to leave me." So he goes and does it. And when she doesn't reply, he's thinking, "Is she cheating on me? Is she cheating on me?" David, you fucking idiot. At 3 p.m., Melissa called him back and they spoke for 15 minutes. She reminded him of her plans to go on top of another boy. After dozens more calls and texts at 5:51, David, he texted Melissa and he said, "I'm on my way to Stefanie's house." They spoke a few more times. Melissa called him at 6 p.m. and then 6:04 p.m. just before the fateful call he made to Stefanie at 6:08. This time it worked though. When he's outside the house, he's on the phone to Melissa. He calls Stefanie. Stefanie comes out. He tells Melissa she's out, so he hangs up the phone. Melissa waited 15 minutes. She then called Stefanie's phone and was satisfied when she did not get an answer. After he stabbed Stefanie, David fled to a friend's house nearby, threw away the knife, and buried his blood-stained jacket in the snow in the backyard. He then phoned Melissa to tell her he'd done it. She told David to take a taxi to her house so he could collect his reward. And on the way there, this fucking moron, David, he texts Melissa. He said, "I love you, honey. I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to get there." And when he gets there, Melissa says, "Tell me what happened. Reenact the killing." He then reenacts the killing and they both have sex. Later that night, one of Melissa's friends sent her a message on Facebook saying she had heard Stefanie had been killed. She asked if Melissa was worried she'd be a suspect. "Who knows? I wanted her dead," Melissa replied, "'cause I only told you and David, so unless you told someone, only you should. But I never did anything and neither did David. We fucked tonight, lol." And on the day of the murder, Patricia and James, the parents of Stefanie, were visiting James's parents. Patricia's cell phone, it rang, and her son Ian said, Mom, there's been a shooting in the neighborhood." So Patricia leaves, she gets into the car, she calls her daughter Stefanie, but to no answer. She then becomes worried, anxious, exasperated. And when Patricia and James get home, they see yellow tape from police and a whole bunch of police around their house. Patricia asked the police, "What's going on? I can't seem to find my daughter." The police then asked Patricia for a description of Stefanie. Patricia says she's 14, she has dark hair, to which the officer said, well, the person in question, the victim, seemed to be 20 years old. But then Patricia got a sick feeling in her stomach knowing that Stefanie could easily be mistaken for being 20. The officer explained that the victim was taken to Toronto East Central Hospital. At the hospital, they identified Stefanie's body and were taken to a private room to stay with her. At 7:15 p.m., Detective Sergeant Stephen Ryan was en route to the murder scene with his partner, Detective Doug Sansom. Later that night, following interviews with Stefanie's parents, her brother Ian, and several of David's friends, they quickly grasped the bizarre history of Stefanie, David, and Melissa. So then at 2 a.m., Ryan, the police officer, knocked on Melissa's door and he takes her in for questioning, and Melissa's mother is there to accompany her. While Melissa was being interviewed, a plainclothes officer arrived at David's mother's house in East York and arrested him. Search warrants were executed at both of their homes, their computers were confiscated and turned over to forensics for investigation. Melissa's cool manner and indifferent responses flummoxed the homicide detectives. Then Melissa, she admitted to Ryan that she ordered David to take Stefanie's life. At that point, the police stopped the interview and they arrested her. The police re-interviewed Melissa later that morning and charged her with first-degree murder. Strangely enough, with her mother at her side, Melissa declined to speak to a lawyer. She admitted that killing Stefanie was her idea, and she was angry with Stefanie for spreading rumors that Melissa was having sex with boys. And during her 3-week trial in the University Avenue courthouse, Melissa Todorovich sat ramrod straight in the accused box, a black elastic holding back her straight hair, an entirely blank look on her face, a grey cardigan mirroring her flat demeanor. Now Marshall Sack, who was her court-appointed lawyer, he made the argument that all the conversations between Melissa and David were playful and joyful and they didn't mean any of it. He also claimed that she wasn't responsible as well, she didn't do it and she wasn't there. Now imagine that. Imagine going to law school for what, 5-10 years and the best argument you can come up with, "Sorry, Your Honor, I didn't mean it." Now they were both found guilty for first-degree murder. But what's interesting for me, as well as the sentencing, was Melissa was seen by a psychiatrist, as you do when you go to court, and a psychiatrist determined that she had borderline personality disorder. And in my mind, I don't give two shits if she had borderline, upper line, hairline, bum line. I don't give a shit what kind of personality disorder she had. She was just a fucked up, dumb, stupid teenager. So Melissa was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 7 years. David himself, he actually pled guilty and he was also given life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. Now in 2018, Melissa was actually granted 6 months of day parole. However, she was brought back to prison in 2019 after the board found she had become entangled in a secret love triangle. And on August 19th, 2020, Melissa was denied full parole. And to conclude on the story, there's nothing more to say aside from the fact that David and Melissa were the height of stupidity, and that's it. There's no other reason. Just lovesick teenagers who had no idea how to handle their emotions. So why don't you guys comment, tell me what you think.